You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am UrzaMaster. With me, as always, is Lord Uther, and joining us today, our recurring guest, Max Cady, counselor.
Counselor?
And
Come out wherever you are.
there we have it. Today, we are talking the tremendous episode that just came out this week. This is, I believe, episode 3 of Strange New Worlds? Episode 4? 4.
Episode 4.
Like the Four Horsemen. This is the 4th episode of Strange New Worlds. Again, a little controversy has brewed over it, but I think that there's a lot to unpack here and a lot of interesting pinpoints to speak of. You could say that this episode radiates Trek tropes. But before I get too deep into it, I want to turn it over to our counselor, Max Cady, to give us a little background and intro.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther, and thanks to you at home. Episode 4 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is Among the Lotus Eaters. And for those of you who remember your Homer and Odyssey assignments back in high school, then you will know that the Lotus Eaters referred to the section in which Homer, trying to get back home to Ithaca, encountered people who would eat from the lotus flower and then forget who and why and what their purpose was, and thereby never finish whatever travels or travails that they were on. And so that's a very appropriate theme and callback for this episode. It was directed by Eduardo Sanchez. You might remember him. He got his start as a co-director on the 1999 film classic, The Blair Witch Project. And he's worked in the horror genre for some time after that. So that's why this episode has sort of a spooky ambiance about it. It was written by Kirsten Bayer and Davy Perez. And Kirsten has an interesting trajectory in Star Trek. She started off writing Voyager tie-in novels for Pocket Books. She pitched several ideas to write on the show, and none of her ideas bore fruit. However, the people responsible for the publishing arm of Star Trek liked her enthusiasm and energy, and so she ended up in 2005 taking on the writing duties of the Star Trek Voyager paperbacks that you would find at Barnes & Noble and Borders and Crown Books and B. Dalton and all your favorite bookstores that no longer exist.
Those were the days.
Indeed, indeed. So she ended up writing 11 of those Voyager tie-in novels. Then she was hired on as a staff writer for Star Trek Discovery, so that she was right there on the ground floor of the new streaming saga of Trek. She was a co-creator of Picard, but as we all know, Terry Matalas took the reins for season 3, so most of her contributions were in the first 2 seasons as a co-creator, executive producer for the early Picard. And on this show, she has the title of co-executive producer for Strange New Worlds. So she's been around the galaxy with these new incarnations of Trek, and rising from humble beginnings, if you will. She was just a fan like so many of us, and she just happened to hit the right glide path to warp speed there. And this is an interesting episode, as UrzaMaster teased us, because it literally takes us back to some of the Star Trek's origins, and I'm not just referring to the Gene Roddenberry, the Menagerie, but we're going all the way back to the busted pilot, The Cage, which featured Captain Pike, and we're going to let UrzaMaster give us some background on those ties or whatever. But we are heading back to Rigel 7, and it's 5 years after the mission from the cage, and Captain Pike and his crew members. Well, I will first start with the tie-ins to the cage, and then we'll kind of explore the episode as it can, if we can remember all the details. So, UrzaMaster, if you want to tell us a little bit about your impressions of how this tied in back to classic Trek canon from over 50 years ago.
It's definitely a little bit of a tenuous tie-in to the cage episode. Literally putting Captain Pike in a cage at one point, which I thought was rather clever. I really liked Rigel 7, when they first touched on it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what are they going to do here? Of course, it's very different from the Rigel 7 we know and remember. But the idea of sort of having your mind manipulated simply by the existence of something on the planet, it's a great trope. Star Trek has done it in a few different iterations throughout every series. Again, this is a crisis moment that is classic Trek. The whole ship is affected, the away team is affected. There's the question of, will the away team be able to get back home? There's the abandoned crewmate, storyline that so often comes up. The prime directive trope that keeps coming up throughout all of Star Trek. It's like, why have a prime directive when every single episode could pretty much be like, well, the prime directive says, well, captain's prerogative. I loved it. I think the coolest thing about this versus the cage is that the way they have changed the mind manipulation here leads me further to believe that the Captain Pike we know and love from this series may end up in a different spot than the Captain Pike we knew and loved from the original series. I'm not necessarily one to be in full support of changing canon or doing a reboot or an alternate timeline, but I do like the intrigue that they're fostering here by, sort of bringing this full circle and giving us a little something different. I also like that they feature La'an in this episode. I got the impression that by having La'an on the away team versus having Ortega's, is that somehow La'an would be able to overcome what was ever going on in Rigel 7, similar to what we saw in the original series with Spock. However, obviously that didn't happen. I also like, as I predicted, that Ortega's took sort of a center stage in this episode and definitely became the driver of the story. And I think, she is just sort of the driver of the Enterprise, but that small function, like a Sulu, really is quite critical. And I really like that because, as with the cage, to that point in original series canon, Spock was essentially a bit of a bit player. He was just sort of that logical science officer who occasionally had some kind of an impactful line, but it was the first time that Spock really usurped the whole show, and it became about him in the menagerie. And this is sort of Sulu's moment, right? This is Ortega's moment to sort of usurp the show and become the sole reason the Enterprise, does whatever the Enterprise does, even though it isn't necessarily 100% material to the story being told, which is, of course, the story of Rigel 7. So there's some sort of syntactical differences between the two episodes, but I really, really enjoyed the fact that they, not only tied in Greek mythology, which I guess I hadn't really thought about the title as much, but I love that tie-in. But they also looped in one of my favorite character actors to sort of play the, old man spiritual guide, yes, who steps in with the away team and is sort of going to acclimate them to the totem and the way of life on Rigel 7. Not unlike the big brains from the cage or the menagerie. who are trying to acclimate the away team to, what life is to be like here. And I like how they flipped that kind of on its head a little bit in this episode. So lots of great tie-ins to the original series, but a lot of fundamental changes that, to be quite frank, I think make it more interesting than the original. So that was my take on it. I have a lot more to say, but I don't want to eat up all our time. I'll turn it over to Lord Uther here for his take.
Yes. Yes to everything you said. I've been thinking about this a lot. So I'm actually going to jump around a little bit here. I continue to wonder what's going to happen to a lot of these characters. Like, it's really getting to the point with me now where, I'm concerned about where they're going to go. Like, I don't want to see Ortega's, I actually thought she was going to die, or Lon was going to die on this mission. I don't know why. Kind of thought that maybe, like, I guess it wouldn't surprise me if they killed off a character, is what I'm getting at, especially with what happened with Hemmer last season. So, my hope is a lot of these people aren't going to meet their fate that way, that they get promoted to another ship, or, are they going to have another mission after this? I'm just kind of curious as to what's going to happen to some of those crew members there. The ties to the original series, I obviously like that they're playing off of that. You brought up a great point about, are they going to change canon with him? I hope they don't. I don't want another timeline. I don't want any of that stuff. I'm hooked enough by the series that you don't have to change the timeline. I still appreciate everything that's going on. I don't want him to go beyond that, quite frankly, because I think we've all become attached to him, and we know what's going to happen to him. I just think it fits the narrative better than, oh, wait, he does something and now he's actually going to make it beyond what should happen to him. And that means they're going to have to redo a South Park episode, too, because they made a reference to him in South Park. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my take on it. Counselor?
So there were some interesting things, I think, that we got to see here with Captain Pike. I think the first that comes to mind, particularly since we're now writing in the now, is his relationship with Captain Battelle. Because again, where it was the Kirk and the Playboy, fun freewheeling, meet a good-looking guest star and swoop her off her feet. Of course, we had Picard and Beverly on and off and on, et cetera, et cetera. And while Riker and Troy certainly captured the affection meters for the Next Generation crew, Picard himself was, a little bit more reserved and so forth. They tried to loosen him up in the features in Insurrection and even a little bit of First Contact, if you want to, think that he and Lily might have cast some affectionate glances at one another. But basically, Pike, this is a contemporary for its time, in the star dates and so forth. This is a relationship that's, he's making dinner for her, she's giving him gifts, and obviously, as we see in the beginning, the conflicting duties, even if they're of the mundane garden variety spaceship captain responsibilities, are sort of eating away at it. And I thought that was an interesting way to frame it, because I don't think, for going on 60 plus years, I don't think Star Trek has always been successful or even cared about acknowledging that. I mean, the idea that, again, these people are out in space, and as you say, it's just like high school relationships. They simmer and they burn and then they burn out. But here's an opportunity going in this episode and forward to, again, try and see what, how is it that you can do that, especially basically on equal footing. There's no sort of power imbalance here. They're both starship captains. They both, wear the yellow. And so I actually found that aspect of this one to be some of the most compelling. I mean, slightly, albeit contrived, that she was responsible for the prosecution of Una a couple of episodes ago directly. I mean, it might have been one thing for her to sort of like, all right, we're taking her into custody. I'm sorry, Chris, I had no choice. They could have left it at that. To have her directly involved in the prosecution and then they're still going on. I mean, it's writing. It is what it is. I can let it slide. But I liked that side of it. And I think Anson Mount as Pike, again, gives you that sense of sort of, in the beginning, hey, your career's going to get sidelined if you hang out with me, and maybe this just isn't worth it, and it's that need to fix that relationship which ultimately pulls him out in the end, because emotion is what helps you keep a hold of your memories when everyone else is trying to forget them. So I like that. I read online that, at least from one reputable source, the reason we had seen less of Pike this season early on, he had taken paternity leave. So they did write around him, shoot around him. I mean, he never wasn't in an episode, but they were, I know that Lord Uther had said, give me more Pike, and here I think he was back at full boat and ready to go there. So I would expect going forward we'll get a fair amount of Pike there. And then the Ortegas, it's interesting. We were waiting for her to get her moment, and she's a character who could very well be a punchline, or just like you just there with the quip, or someone says something serious and then she undercuts it with a light banter or joke or something, and that's a very easy character to write, but it also keeps them at sort of a one-dimensionality that quite frankly can grate on you after a while. And I liked here when the asteroids are bouncing off the ship and she's forgotten who she is. I mean, like, she's genuinely terrified. Like, I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on. Somebody fix this. And I thought that was played very well in that moment. I thought I honestly was asking myself, as a viewer, well, how are they going to fix that? And I mean, the fix comes from within. I actually liked her reorienting herself and the confidence, I'm, Erica Ortegas and I fly the ship. I liked that a little bit stronger than Pike's realization. If there was one thing on this episode I'd like to quibble on, it's that we had this character who had become a despot after being left behind by Pike, and more on that in a second. But they throw it out in sort of expository dialogue pretty quickly, like, oh, if you're in the castle long enough, you're shielded from the radiation and your memories will come back, and then snap of a finger, his memories came back. It just felt like we had come to like the 45th minute of the episode and we had to solve it, when this is a kind of dilemma that could have actually, I know UrzaMaster loves a good two-parter or so forth. They could have even spent more time building towards, maybe a proactive solution to it. It just felt like sort of like, okay, and Chris, memories in 3, 2, 1.
That's a great point, because wasn't there a Next Gen episode where they forgot who they were and then Worf became captain? Like, you almost could have seen something like that. This would have been a great two-parter. That's an excellent point, because
I just felt like when we got to it at the end, I mean, it sort of happens. And I mean, you go with it because,
right.
We don't want to spend 4 episodes of Anson Mount looking around dazed. What was I saying? What is this place? But it just, like I say, I just all of a sudden in the moment, I just felt like the tug of the leash, like, okay, we gotta wrap this up. The credits are coming. Next episode starts in 13 seconds. So that was one kind of thing there. And then the other thing that I don't think was a flaw, but possibly an opportunity not explored. When we get the backstory briefly about, we left you behind, we thought, your life readouts were nil or whatever it was. There was, there was an explanation for it, not an excuse, but there was an explanation as to why Pike acted the way he did, and you know, the residual guilt at having lost three crew members on the mission, and then discovering that, oh, we screwed up. There's actually one here, and he's gone over the edge. He's become Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, and I thought there was an opportunity because we know how well Anson Mount has portrayed Pike to this point. I want an episode, or I want a moment where the captain really does screw up. Like, there's not just some convenient, easy way to explain it off, like, oh, well, your life signs were low, so we thought you were dead when we left. I mean, I wanted, you know, and it might make him a little more flawed, you know, all of that, but that's kind of what we are, these imperfect carbon beings. I wanted Pike to, you know, the mission went south, and I got, you know, scared or
I had to
whatever,
bail.
and I had to bail, and I, you know, and that. I guess I wasn't looking for something that you could just say, well, I did everything by the book, and you know, I'm sorry it broke out that way, because you know, that would have given a little bit more depth to the villain as well. We didn't really spend a lot of time with the villain, just a few scenes, you know, here and there. But that could have been really something like, you left me behind, you betrayed, you know, what was I supposed to do, kind of a thing. And so I feel like that's an opportunity that could have been explored. Now, in place of that, we had the away team and the starship, everybody suffering from the effects of this radiation, including Spock and Chapel and everything else. So I'm not disappointed with where they went, but boy, if you really wanted to hone in on Pike and make it seem like I made a bad call a few years ago, and I've kind of, you know, tried to move forward with it and push it to the background, and now my mistake, my error in judgment, my momentary lapse is, you know, here are the consequences. That you know, that would have been a very interesting, and maybe a note they could play in another episode down the road. But I would love to see even more, because I think we've seen Pike, you know, as somebody that we can still root for and we can still get behind as a captain, even if he's not a flawless, perfectly, you know, this guy, you know, he's terrific. He's great on his feet, and he's a fighter, and he's a lover, and I don't know. I like the idea. I think Mount can take us to some darker places and still have the respect and adoration of Star Trek fans. What do you think, Urza? Or Uther?
Oh, go ahead, Lord Uther.
So a couple things. One, I think we buy into this, you know, left behind crew member becoming in charge of the society, because it's been set up before in so many other episodes that you don't need a lot of explanation to buy into it. Oh, this is what tends to happen. The guy has a better technology, and now he's going to take over, or he's got a book about socialism, and now he's going to take over, or fascism, whatever that one original episode was. And so I think we can buy into that pretty quickly. To Urza's point, this might be one of the few flaws, is that, you know, it's only 10 episodes, so you can't take something like this to where you maybe could do something a little more creative and have it branch those 2 episodes. Which brings us to that point now. We've only got 6 episodes left. One of them's going to be a season finale that's going to be a cliffhanger for season 3, because now it knows there's season 3. What are you going to do in those 5 episodes to kind of... I guess each season, you know, are we going to see the Gorn? I know we keep bringing that up, right?
Like, Gorn, right?
Are we going to focus on that? Because we all have felt that's where the season was going to go, unless that's what season 3 now is going to be about, and they're going to do more. Well, or they're going to do maybe more character development. I don't know. And then to your point there, Counselor, Anson Mounts, and I wrote this to you guys. He does one thing in this episode that just makes me continue to think he's such a brilliant actor and buy into him being Pike. And he's standing there with Ortegas, and they're talking about flying. She's like, "Well, who's going to fly the shuttle?" And he does something that you or I would do. He's like, "Me." You know, he's like, "This guy, I can do it just fine." And it was just so human. And what I mean by that is it wasn't an actory type of answer. Like, you buy into this guy being the leader, being the captain, having those moments like we see when he's cooking for people, which I've told you before, I absolutely love that. But here was another moment where he's like, "Me," you know, and he just kind of walks away. It was just so gosh darn good. Last point. I almost feel like the writers kind of on purpose, or maybe I'm just reading into it a little bit differently, with having Ortegas go, I fly the ship. I fly the ship. Yeah, that's what you do. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like it was a little tropey in a sense, or maybe on purpose, I don't know, but I fly the ship. That's my job. Almost, again, making it a little comical, and that's the obvious thing that she does. She flies the ship. And now some other people online have taken it further that she's the greatest Star Trek pilot ever. We don't need to start doing that stuff, by the way. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. She's the greatest Enterprise pilot ever. And I'm like, what about Data? Look at what he did in Picard season 3. Like, there's all these things. How about we just appreciate what she did? That doesn't make her the greatest ever. She is a pilot. She should be doing those things. And I got to throw in one more thing because I can't help myself, and too bad. The layout now that they have, that we kind of saw over her shoulder of her flying the ship, with the Enterprise on the screen and the proximity alerts, I just thought that was great. I also like that Spock didn't save the day, because I had a feeling that he was going to be able to kind of fight it, or because he was part Vulcan, he wasn't going to, or he was going to read, the pad that he had, and he's like, oh, I'm Spock, I can do this. I kind of like that too, and I think that's the other beauty of this character is we're not seeing a refined Spock. To your point, Counselor, he made the mistake. He didn't realize it. Whether he didn't take the time to know what was going on, he's like, oh yeah, there's just some anomalies here with some of this radiation, whatever, we'll be fine. So kind of to your point about we want to see Pike screw up and how does he deal with it, we kind of saw Spock do that, and he even admitted it. Well, he didn't admit it, but the voiceover where he's sitting at the station, she's like, oh yeah, Spock figured out a way to modulate the shields. Once we were out of it, I thought that was great too. Spock has faults. That's okay. He still can figure things out. Urza, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was all really good. I was going to mention that. I think as much as I would have liked to see more of the human side of Pike, I think we get so much of that it was kind of nice to see sort of the by-the-book captain. Because I think a lot of what we see in Starfleet captains throughout every series, even Picard season 3 with, oh boy, I've already forgot his name, Captain...
Oh, you've been eating the lotus flowers. Goodness.
I have been eating the lotus flower.
Shaw?
Captain Shaw, who I loved, by the way. He was very by the book. And we talked in a previous episode about how much we really appreciated that, because you don't see the day-to-day captains who just sort of do their job. That's what Pike was doing on the original Rigel mission, was sort of just doing his job, and yep, we have 3 dead, okay, let's get out of here and save the rest. Not really taking the time to be like, do we see everybody's body, which, captains traditionally do in movies and stuff because they're, perfect archetypes. So I think there was enough there for me to buy in, and the whole, I was a test pilot, kind of thing. It was kind of that free-balling sort of Kirk-esque, I liked it. But yeah, to see Spock, literally make a mistake where he goes, I think the information's here, but I can't read it. That was, to me, very powerful. Like, I was like, that's a Spock we don't ever get to see. I fully expected Spock to be the one to save the day. And I was very excited to see Ortegas get her moment, even though, again, like a Sulu, throughout most of the original series, he flies the ship. That's
I fly the ship.
pretty much it. Even, right. I hate to say it, but like, even as the captain of the Excelsior, he sort of just flew the ship into the ribbon. Like, it was like, all right, yeah. shields. And that was about it. Like, he still sort of just flew the ship while he sipped his tea. So I thought it was a big nod to Sulu. I hate to say it, but I think this episode, it was more of a nod to just the character actors that made up the original series than anything. I was a little bummed we didn't get to see more Una, because I feel like you can never see enough Una. Her character still intrigues me very, very much, more so than even La'an, even though I know, La'an is a Noonien Singh, but I'm sure we're going to get a payoff of that later. I still want to see, Jesse James Keitel come back in one of the episodes this season. I mean, I don't think you set up an antagonist like that well and not have her pop up again as, a teaser for Cybok. I just feel like they have to do that.
Is that Harvey Keitel's daughter?
Niece, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I believe
Yeah,
so. I believe it's.
and she's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think they could. There's so much they could do with that character. I really hope they do a Strange New Worlds movie. Personally.
Yes. Yes.
I'd love to see a big screen adaptation of some sort, but I still want to see the full mission play out too, because I think there's so many places they could go. Because we, like you guys said, we haven't seen a Gorn yet. We still need to. Although, if we're thinking original series, how often do we see the Gorn in the original series? Once. One time. And literally, other than being mentioned a couple of times, the Gorn don't play a big part anywhere. So I like that they're leaning into that a little bit. I'd like to see more Klingons, more Romulans. I want to see the Breen. I really, really want to see the Breen, because that has always been a very intriguing antagonist class of alien that they just really never dealt with a whole lot. I mean, they come up a bunch of times. I know it's just a nod to Battlestar Galactica, but really, honestly, I think they would be an intriguing, maybe not this season, but in future seasons of the show. First contact with the Breen would be super interesting to see. And who better to do it than Captain Pike and this crew to kind of set the stage for what happens in Next Generation a little bit, and Deep Space Nine. I think there's a lot of possibilities. There's also Trelane. I mean, there's so many other interesting things they could do on like a one-off type deal. The Orion Syndicate, the Slave Girls of Orion from the original series. I mean, they were known in the original series, so you got to think that at some point the Orion Syndicate and Captain Pike probably cross paths. I think this episode gets back to the writer's room. Again, I think they did a brilliant job of doing what they could within the time constraints. And I think that's where some of the opportunities to make this a two-parter or explore a couple points a little deeper come from, is they are trying to condense as much as possible because they only get 10 episodes. They have to cover a lot of character development really quickly in the space of an hour, which, I mean, that's a good amount of time, but when you're talking 10 episodes in a season and not a 26-episode, hour-long season, there's a lot of character development that could easily get missed, but they're somehow achieving it with very clever dialogue. I won't say I was too disappointed with how Captain Pike got his memory back. I actually found that moment to be one of the most tense Star Trek moments I think we've ever seen on any series, where he's about to kill this guy he mourned so heavily and felt so much regret. And really, you can only get that from his facial expressions, the way he delivers the lines up to that point about this, and how he's genuinely shocked to see him and trying to be apologetic and explain himself, but mentally can't get there because of the planet. I thought it was beautiful. I mean, really, truly well acted, well written. And then the moment where Rigel 7 changes a person, he's about to waste this guy, like, Boondock Saints style, just blast him, Anyway, so he started blasting, and that to me is one of those instantaneous realization moments, that epiphany type moment where it's like, I'm not going to kill you. That line alone, I mean, just his immediate change in tone was just like, oh, shit. I mean, that was a tension breaker that, was it as impactful as maybe a two-parter episode where they could have done a little bit more here or done a little more creative solution making? It could have been, deeper. But at that point, are you beating a dead horse? And that's the one thing where, like, I think when you get these 26-episode, hour-long type shows, I go back to one of my favorites, Supernatural, you get a little a little bit of the beating of the dead horse. Like, I mean, how many times do we have to explain that Lucifer's a bad guy? Like, all the time, every episode, every other word. Don't get me wrong, Lucifer's one of my favorite characters in that show, but like, there was a little bit of beating the dead horse in some of those stories they were trying to build. That was another show that could have done a lot with two-part episodes, and they had more episodes per season. But, you know, Strange New Worlds does a really tough job. As much as they do it well, it's got to be incredibly difficult as a writer, because I'm sure those scripts come in double length or triple length, and then they have to pare them down, literally sometimes word by word, to get it to fit in the time. You know, and you know, they have the flexibility, I'm sure, of like, hey, you've got an extra 15 or 15 fewer, whatever. We'll fit you in somewhere around that hour mark. So if an episode gets done at 53 minutes, fantastic. If it goes an hour and 7, fantastic. That's the beauty of streaming, but at the same time, it's also the Achilles heel, because they do have to make those harsh cuts, or maybe even film out scenes that it's like, you know what, in the editing room, it's not going to make it, because it doesn't carry enough gravity. So, you know, hats off, as we say every episode, to the writer's room.
It's actually a good segue, because I was going to ask Counselor a couple questions about that. Is that how it typically works? You get a script that comes in, it's X number of pages, and you have to form the script to the time allotted, or do you shoot the whole thing and then chop it up to make the episode? What have you typically experienced?
Yeah, I think in features, there's, you can get a feature length script, 170 pages, and
okay.
I mean, the idea, the unofficial Bible is it's a page a minute, right? So if you have a page of dialogue, you read that approximates a minute of screen time when you're shooting it. But that same single page could also be, a look at the Genesis planet. That, I mean, you've got all this description and adjectives and color. And I mean, that's probably going to take, it may read as one page, but that might take 3 or 4 minutes to properly visually orient an audience to what it is that they're seeing. So, I mean, again, in television, economy, especially in the more traditional network models, or, even, basic cable to some degree, you don't have a lot of time for fat and filler. Streaming has allowed some shows, Stranger Things, Netflix's Wednesday, to go beyond the traditional length that we're accustomed to in a drama. I mean, a drama with commercials on a network is approximately 45 to 48 minutes, and then you add the commercials to it. But these other shows can do 57 minutes uninterrupted, 58 minutes, which is still an hour of real time, but it's much more material than you'd be able to fit into a standard CSI episode, let's say, or Magnum PI on NBC now. So I think to Ursa's point, sometimes in the editing room, they'll do a whole sequence of Ortegas in sickbay, and they'll be like, no, we kind of already covered that when Uhura was in there, so we're just gonna, out with it. Or maybe Uhura's stuff didn't end up as strong as Ortega's. I mean, so oftentimes you try to catch that before you're rolling cameras, but that happens. And I think always as a writer, I mean, and again, TV is very fast paced. Streaming, at least, you're not built into some network schedule that says we're premiering new shows on September 23rd, so you better be, streaming can just drop. They can announce season 3 of Trek could be next January, or it could be next October, a year plus from now. I mean,
right.
They go when they're ready, it feels like, which is kind of freeing for a creator, because you're not sitting here trying to hit a deadline. Even in major studio films, they're like, we better have Spider-Man ready by June 2nd, because that's when we're. But I think streaming does allow you the flexibility to, like I say, you got to write everything, you got to shoot everything, you can edit and do post, and then when it's ready to go, you can do the Netflix thing and drop it all at once, or you can do the Paramount Plus thing and drop it a week at a time. And I mean, it is a little more convenient like that. which is why the whole, you know, the whole thing that Ursa has talked about time and again, and I'm starting to come around and see his vision there. You know, if you could just take purely budgetary considerations aside, and you can't because these are major companies and they, you know, can't spend endless amounts of money. The character-driven approach that Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is doing here lends itself really well to a much longer season, because you can take those individual episodes of Lon or Pike or Uhura and you can seed them in throughout and give audiences a deeper bite, a deeper cut of them, and still not sacrifice the Gorn or, you know, the whatever subplots you're going to be building on, the Noonien Singh, you know, genetics, you know, we're building to Khan. You can still have your cake and eat it too there. But when we're dealing with only the 10, I think, you know, those character-y episodes are probably the first things that get pushed, you know, kind of nudged to the side, because they want to go plot heavy and we got to, you know, tell these stories.
Right.
So they're trying to walk a fine line, and I think they've been very successful. But they're trying to drive a narrative for 10 episodes forward, you know, with the promise of more to come, while still not just saying, okay, here's plot, here's more plot, here's, you know, remember what you saw 3 weeks ago? Here, we're calling back to it. And remember this, because we're going to call back to it in 3 more weeks. I mean, I don't feel like this is so densely serialized that you're like, wait, I'm lost. I have to go back and rewatch this just for that one moment when Uhura was in sickbay and she meant, you know, I mean, that can drive some people mad, particularly if they're on the treadmill trying to, you know, catch up on the show and they're like, wait, what? What are they referencing? So I think this show has proven you can do it, and you can do it wildly successfully, and for both the fans and the casual viewers alike. I still believe, for the most part, that you could drop in on any episode of Strange New Worlds, unless it's a direct two-parter, and you can at least get the gist, right? I mean, you can, in this episode, you don't need to know everything about M'Benga and Pike and Lon on the planet to realize their relationships to each other and how they work in this context. Same with the ship. You know, we get Spock, we get Chapel, we get Erica. I mean, this show really rewards sort of the casual fan as much as it helps to program to the diehard Trekkers. So that's, to me, I think that's where the writing room and the producers get a high five, because they're showing it can be done. You don't have to just be canon heavy. You should have read the comic books from 1995, because that's what we're referencing now. You can still just have a fun time and family friendly. You know, again, we're not showing you, you know, graphic Walking Dead style violence, and we're not using language that would get you in trouble. And it's, like I say, it's something the whole family can enjoy. So there you go.
One more question, Urza. This is again for Counselor, so I apologize, Urza.
Okay.
Counselor, you've mentioned a lot producers throughout our many Warp Core episodes that everyone's subscribing to. Could you give us a little more background on what a producer does, and maybe we can just kind of gear it more. I know for a movie, I'm sure it's different. So for the TV show, I guess what I'm getting at too is, who makes the final decisions on these things? Is it the producer?
Well,
is the producer the one that oversees the budget? I mean,
Yeah, so you've got your showrunners, and in this case, Henry Alonzo Myers and Akiva Goldsman are the current showrunners for Strange New Worlds, and they have been since the launch. So you've had continuity of voice and purpose. I mean,
okay.
You know, in many cases, writers can, in the TV network streaming models, writers will double up as producers. You'll see writing credits,
okay,
and then you'll see executive producer credits, co-producer credits, producer. I mean, so you know, the jobs, they all, there's blurred lines there. But I mean, you know, in its most basic, purest utopian model, you know, the writer is sitting there tapping on the keys and coming up with all the action and dialogue and all of that, and the producer is the, you know, in some cases, and then the director is there saying, okay, action, okay, I need more from you, Mount, less from you, Mount, more, less, more. But everything else, from, making sure that the Teamsters have their parking spots, did the costume designer do the laundry so that there's not a stain on Una's tunic. I mean, all of that's going to cycle through a producer, various, decision making. Hey, are we going to get that big guest star, that super secret Trek fan that will do it for scale? I mean, so, they're the traffic cops in the office fielding all the phone calls, the special effects guy won't talk to the key grip, and so I got to go and diffuse that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like
Okay.
that's
Right,
basically what they're doing. And when you're doing a good job, which it can be, a hit or miss proposition in this business. Like the best producers are probably the ones that are doing it all behind the scenes, and you're not even aware. You're just showing up to work to say the lines and shoot the scene and light it, and you don't have to score the music, and you don't have to sit there and worry about the unnecessary drama. And I think that's what this show, in its season and a quarter so far, has shown us. When you don't have that behind the scenes, like jostling and bickering and so forth, you can get really good television because everyone's rowing in the same direction and everyone's on board, And there are many, 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 many horror stories of features and television that was, people say like, well, great conflict breeds a great story. And I don't necessarily think you could subscribe to that. I think it's even better
Right.
when you have people who believe in what you're trying to do and will, they put all of their energy instead of into the distractions and the conflicts and the chaos. They pour it into the show. And as a result, you get these unusually strong, well-rounded, complete meals. And so I think, like I say, I think the other Trek shows have had at times a little bit of that turmoil, a little bit of that, we see it one way, and the network, Paramount says, no, we see it another, and But I think with this show, I think the creators, I think Myers and Goldsman have done a very good job, a difficult job, of trying to thread this needle and tell fun, original Trek stories without seeming too derivative, and with also not alienating the people that really love and breathe, this universe. And I think that's where you have to stop and tip your cap and show your appreciation, So if you hire a good team, you've heard this along, then your work is already done. And I think a producer, I think they've got a really good squad right now, trying to give us exceptional television.
All right, 2 questions for both of you, but I'm going to start with Urza first. Urza, do you feel that they're doubling? Well, this is for both of you. I'm going to start with Urza. Are they doubling down on the Mbenga master medical person and master ninja at the same time? Do you think that's been purposeful these past couple episodes? Do you think they've made their point? Where do you think they're going somewhere with this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a Bones, right? I mean,
Right.
if you think about the original series, Bones was really just a straight up doctor, but very dedicated, very influential to the captain. I mean, he was the captain's right-hand man. He was the number one in the absence of a number one. Spock was a science officer. There was no second in command. So Bones really filled that role. Now you've got Una in the number one role, so it's like, okay, you don't have a true blue number one in the original series, so since you have that component, that Riker, let's say, that the original series didn't have, how do you build your chief medical officer? And you've got Chapel, by the way, who's also like adept with medicine. How do you build out this character and make them relevant? And I think by giving him this background with Chapel, this sort of Section 31-esque type, espionage slash, shall we say, medically enhanced super soldier against the Klingons, but somebody who's also deeply human, not just like a killing machine or, just a doctor. Like, damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor and I'm also a soldier. Like, I think it's a bit of a play, but it's also a very interesting way of building out a character. And of course, we saw in season 1, you've kind of pulled one of the most interesting components about him out of this. You've taken away the daughter with the terminal illness and resolved that storyline. You have to give him something else to play with to deep in the character, and I think they're doing a brilliant job with it. I mean, truly, I think the way that they've set him up is the reason why he continues to be successful. Because we know at some point McCoy is going to step in now, and we don't know when or where. We just know that it does eventually happen, and I think there's a doctor in between as well. So I really feel like they're building him up in a way that's going to, I hate to say it, but see him meet a tragic end at some point. And like Hemmer, he's going to affect the crew. And, I think as we're going to see with probably all the characters, if they're sticking to canon on this show, there's going to be some heartbreak involved. And you're going to get the backfill characters that leave you with a little more bland taste. They sort of just like, yep, I'm a doctor. That's what I do. I'm a doctor. And then, of course, McCoy later on will fill more of a role, and that's how they bridge that canonical gap. But it's beautifully done, and I think they should continue doing it. And I want to throw out there, because we talk about the writers, and now we've touched on producers as well. I want to throw out there that I'm speaking for myself, but I think the show's general feeling is that the writers make the content worthwhile. So we certainly stand with writers in their everlasting struggle. And I would say our deepest thanks goes to them, not just for Picard Season 3, but for all of Strange New Worlds thus far. Hopefully, with Season 3, they can preserve this, and we can see, a contented writer's room and not a contentious one.
Amen.
Counselor, where do you think they're going with Mbenga? I mean, I think even purposely says, you're coming with because you're such a great fighter. It's like they're continuously sending this message home.
I think if you want to, have a reduction to sort of its most basic storytelling elements, I think it's the idea of, and Urza, touched upon this quite well. Am I a man of healing, or am I a man of violence? And I mean, and to actually give it that stark moral choice. I mean, it's not something that resides in the subconscious, and maybe you question yourself. They make it a very overt path that he should choose to follow. Now, I mean, and in the past, it was violence that may or may not have defined, what he thought his purpose was in terms of, winning, during the Klingon War or so forth. And perhaps now it's realizing that he is a man of medicine and so forth. And so that struggle, while, I mean, again, is not exactly subtle, is something that we're not seeing with McCoy, and, we're not seeing with Beverly. And I mean, it's a great stark choice, as long as they don't overplay it, like every episode is like, do I punch him or do I heal him? But it is a nice wrestling internally, and you can explore that in various, like if the Enterprise took on a bunch of, let's say injured Gorn. I mean, I'm giving you the worst example of this, but
right.
And he had a reason for vengeance, to kill the Gorn, but overriding that to save them or save a Gorn, wounded Gorn or something. Like, there are ways to explore that duality and that division within him that could pay off, down the road. And I think that's what they're doing with him, is this idea of, I was once this, now I find myself drawn to this, and which one will I be? And can I be both? Is there room in this world for both? Is there, or is it simply a binary choice? I have to be one or the other. And so, I doubt the show will pause to ponder such philosophical questions overtly, but it's nice to, like I say, it does give Mbenga, I think he's much more developed even through, a couple of episodes of season 2 than I think even with the suffering child, because again, that's a universal fear of any parent, and so it's kind of easy to empathize and jump right into that and feel his pain there. But killing the Klingons, especially as brutally, as I like to refer to it, his old boy moments in episode 1 here. I mean, it's a little bit more like, there were moments in that where I was actually I wasn't squeamish, but I was like, wow, I mean, he's taking almost a sadistic delight in being able to overpower these Klingons, with nothing more than his hands or a blade, like he was enjoying it, if you will.
Right.
And I mean, if you taste blood and learn you love the taste of it, then it's very hard to get rid of that. And so, like I say, I would like to see them, judiciously continue that exploration, because it's a more provocative, I don't know if I want to see that with Pike. I think that might push, Pike to a too dark of a place, but I like the idea of the ship's doctor sort of questioning which moral identity I wish to be, and make it a choice. Not just, it's not something that's done for him, but him saying, I choose to be this rather than what I was. So,
2 more questions, too bad. And then we'll rate it. I can't help myself. Urza, where's our engineer? Are we going to get more of a deeper, going to save the day, some Scotty moments? Is she a placeholder? What's the deal with her?
Palia is definitely a character I want to see more of this season, and I'm sure it's going to be a back end of the season payoff. I don't think they're going to kill her off like they did with Hemmer. I think she's just going to simply return to Starfleet at the end of the season, and then they're going to plug in the next chief engineer because they're building towards, Scott.
Montgomery Scott, yeah.
Yeah, they want to create that sort of vacuum that needs to be filled, and I'm going to guess we're going to get a very young Montgomery Scott, maybe next season, maybe the season after, whenever it does happen, who's going to be, exceptional at what he does. But he's going to be young, and he's going to be, because Montgomery Scott in the original series is probably one of the more serious, kind of by-the-book characters, but just has those sort of like...
More mature.
Yeah, he's more mature, but he's got kind of those good old boy moments,
right,
where he's like, hey, laddie, we can take a few insults, but if you start talking about my ship, I'm going to bust your Klingon jaw. I think we're going to see a little bit more hot-headed Montgomery Scott, who's going to develop that maturity through some, shall we say, sophomoric ups and downs, perhaps. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see kind of an unhinged Scotty who just gets pissed off and curses when he's, got to change the brakes on a 96 Cadillac DeVille. Somebody here might have done that at one point.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I would love to see that, but I think it's true. We need a bit of a stopgap before, like, timeline-wise, Montgomery Scott would fit in. Because he's, older than the rest of the original series crew, and had an established, place on the ship prior to Kirk becoming captain. So I do think we're going to see at least 2 more episodes probably with Palia. I think part of that is the cost. They can only feature her so many times. And I think part of it is they need to find, the writers have to have the right stories to utilize a character of that gravity. And it's probably going to have something to do with kind of what she's already had something to do with. It's probably going to cross over with La'an's story, or it's going to come into conflict with Starfleet security or something along those lines. It's a little more cheeky. It could be one of the funny episodes, that they're inevitably going to do, where kind of like The Naked Now, or in the first season where they were in the fairy tale world in the nebula. Like, I think it's going to be something like that, and then there'll probably be something with some real substance and gravity. I'm going to guess the season finale. And the implication will probably be that, is she going to get killed off? But they're not going to do that because they just did that. And instead, she's maybe going to save the day, and it's going to be based on her age and experience with humanity, and it's going to bring out the best in the rest of the crew, and she's going to show them that they can be self-reliant. And then maybe next season we don't have a chief engineer, and we just have a corps of engineers or something, as they build towards their search for a chief engineer or something. But me personally, I love what they've done with her this season. But that's kind of the exploration of that function I would love to see on the ship.
Counselor, where's our engineer?
No, I think it's a more mundane thing, as they said. Yeah, we've got Carol Kane, and we can afford to have her in 4 episodes. So pick your 4, and I love how Ursa's already kind of laid it out, because I think that's exactly right. I think we'll get something a little whimsical, or at least not with universe-ending stakes, in which she will play a factor. And then I think they will be put into crisis. The Enterprise will be put into some sort of season-ending crisis in which Palia's knowledge, wisdom, so forth will end up being. I think you've nailed it. You might as well have been in the writers' room, because I feel like that's exactly where they're going.
Multiple times.
Where they're going to go. So I mean, whatever pipeline you're tapped into, stay there, Ursa, because I think that's good.
They could hire me as a writer. I'd be happy. I've always wanted to be a writer. I've just never had the opportunity.
Right.
Last question, no explanation. I just want one answer. I'm going to start with the counselor and go to Urza, because we'll build on this in our future episodes. Who is the next TOS character we see? Counselor? No explanation, just the name.
I have to say, I think it will be Montgomery Scott. Even
okay, no, I don't want to hear anything else. Okay. I'm not listening to you.
Got it. Montgomery Scott.
Urza.
Okay.
Urza.
Montgomery Scott.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Okay.
Let's warp core it up. I think we're going to see McCoy. Okay, let's.
That would be intriguing as well.
I can't give any explanation. Sorry, I have to abide by my own rules. Urza.
Well, as we do each episode, we will now undertake the bold action and exploration of our warp core ratings. Gentlemen, out of 7 warp cores, episode 4, Strange New Worlds, season 2, Counselor?
As we were discussing it, and you all made cogent, level-headed, and logical points, I think it came up at a half a warp core for me now. I think I'm now in a 6. I think maybe when I started this episode, I think I was probably around a 5.5, because I think I had some concerns about the ease in which certain things were resolved and so forth. But I think after listening to you both deftly analyze it, I think I not only accept your explanations, but I actually I welcome them. So I'm going to go with a very solid 6. I think the premise and the idea is that's where most of this energy comes from, even if it feels tropian, and even if they've touched upon it in other shows. The idea of a collective amnesia and struggling to, define a purpose in life. I think the universality of that alone is worthy of merit. So I'm gonna go 6 on this one.
I'll go 6.5. Excellent episode. And I've been giving so many 7s. I just it doesn't.
You're practically Jerry Ryan.
Yes, I just can't. I guess maybe it's the lack of the engineer. I don't know. I mean, but even Uhura's scenes, which were so brief, they were just so well acted out. But I'm waiting for something to kind of knock me off of my feet. Again, it wasn't, there were several parts of this episode that were callbacks to previous episodes, so maybe that's why I give it a 6.5. I'm waiting for my Gorn storyline, I guess, so I'll go 6.5.
And I, ever the optimist, will complete the half step up, and I'm going to give it a perfect 7 out of 7 warp cores. This one did sweep me off my feet. I really enjoyed this episode. As a fan and even as a casual viewer, I think this was a perfectly done Star Trek episode. It hit on every trope we should. It developed all the characters in a deep and interesting way. The acting was flawless. The writing was flawless. I loved what they did with one of my favorite character actors, who sort of became the Ben Kenobi of the episode, but that
Yes.
got flipped on its head, which is one of my favorite archetypal things to do in writing, and then completely turn that journey around and reveal something deeply human about a race of aliens. I also thought it made cogent arguments about, you could say, the master and slave relationship, where the slave is trying to justify their place in life based on hokey religion and the benefits, honestly, of eating the lotus flower, which goes back to Greek mythology, and then realizing, how deeply wrong that relationship can be and how deeply meaningful life can be with long-term memories, even if it's associated with pain. The other thing, which we didn't touch on, that I think pushes it to a perfect 7 from a 6.5 for me, is the fact that this indirectly ties right into Captain Pike having this future memory that he's been holding on to. And we see him freed of that, and yet he still leads a revolution to capture his memories again. He has deep emotions tied to that memory, so he should have some hesitation of getting his memory back, because now emotionally he's free of that fear of the future. And if he accepted this position, he wouldn't face that future. And instead, he is driven by much stronger feeling to redeem himself, which to me adds depth to his character that truly makes him the epitome of Starfleet captain. And I think that's, when we talk about Starfleet captains, those are such epic positions. The gravitas alone of being a captain on a Star Trek show, you have to have some real clout. And that's where I think your Janeways and your Siskos struggled at first, because they really weren't taken too seriously. Janeway, of course, being sort of the first female captain we see prominently featured. It took her a little while to kind of build her gravitas, but she got there, through trial by fire. Sisko had a funny voice. I don't know if anybody's ever talked about this in a podcast, and we'll talk about it when we get to Deep Space Nine, but he's got a goofy voice, like in the first couple episodes. And it's hard to take him seriously as a captain. And I think even he's not a captain when he takes over Deep Space Nine. He's just a commander, and is promoted later in the series fairly quickly. But, those two became epic captains through their trials and tribulations. I think Picard and Kirk sort of just were. They just sort of assumed that role by their own acting gravitas, which is also really cool. But I think that's where Enterprise and Discovery kind of fell, because Scott Bakula really, to me, never screamed Starfleet captain. And I haven't watched Discovery to really give too much input on that, but I don't really ever take that show seriously. I still kind of don't. That's where I think this series is again, it gets back to the success of that writer's room. They're building characters in a way that is novel and, really brings some legitimacy to such a short season. Such short episodes. These could all be 2-hour-long movies, every single episode. And they're dealing with half that time, half that script power, and sometimes just limited sets. Let's be honest. There's really not a whole lot of sets to some of these episodes. We're talking the Enterprise, 1 or 2 rooms, and 2 or 3 rooms on the planet's surface. You can't really build a whole lot from 5 sets, 6 sets, whatever it ends up being. Even on short episodes of Next Generation, you might have 10 or 12 different sets that you're dealing with in a 23-minute episode, which is a lot. So that I gush over this show. This episode impressed me so much. I also don't like that I'm giving out so many 7s, but I think it just speaks to the fact that this certified fresh Star Trek streaming series on Paramount Plus, Strange New Worlds, should be earning way more awards and way more acclaim than it is, because it's just that damn good. With that, we have baldly gone where no Warp Core podcast has ever gone before. And we will continue on our journey in the next episode. We will leave you with this. Live long and prosper.